Hey, y'all, I see this kind of post everywhere on the internet where if you have a doctor's appointment at like 4 p.m., you can't do anything before that. Like you just sit around from the moment you wake up until it's time to do that thing. So hopefully this video will help you understand what's happening in your brain that makes you freeze all day. I have a job interview at 4 p.m. Therefore, I can do nothing until then. So for a neurotypical person, if you have something scheduled at a certain at a certain time, the time prior to that is available for other things. You can be productive in other ways. But if you have ADHD, this is incredibly difficult to do. I have so many patients who will tell me, if I have something later in the day, I can't do anything before then. I'm just waiting for that thing to happen. And once that thing happens, then maybe I can do something after that. But oftentimes, waiting until 4 p.m. is actually exhausting, takes up a lot of energy. And then they look at their lives and they're like, how on earth does this work? This feels terrible. How am I ever supposed to succeed at anything in life if I can only do one thing a day? And this kind of goes back to these chronic feelings of guilt and that I'll always be in trouble, always feeling like some chore or activity that I'm doing wrong and I should be doing something else. There's a lot of feelings that come with that. So let's understand this. People with ADHD tend to be environmentally oriented. Okay, this is sort of a simplification, but we know that people are very sensitive to their environment. Okay, and there's a great quote, which I'll pull up later if I get a chance, about how, if someone is prompting you to do something, you can do something. So when you get excited by something in your environment, it brings out a lot of good energy. You get super hyped about it. The relationship between what happens in your head and what is happening in the outside world is very close together. So neurotypical people can separate the outside world from the internal world. People with ADHD have a lot of trouble with this. And if we listen to Dr. Michaela, she's like, these are variants and we should stop trying to make those people neurotypical. I completely agree. It's a huge part of what I do. I started preparing for this stream this morning. I just could not be bothered to deal with this until basically this morning, because I was doing something else before then. If I start preparing for something for 2 days from now, it'll occupy my head and I won't be able to focus on what's going on today. Hey y'all, if you're interested in applying some of the principles that we share to actually create change in your life, check out Dr. K's Guide to Mental Health. And if you kind of tunnel down, okay, why aren't you motivated? And they're like, well, there's no point. And if you get underneath, there's no point, what you ultimately find is hopelessness. So what the yogis discovered is that what we call motivation, they actually called a concentrated mind. What's the difference between someone who actually does stuff and someone who just tries to do stuff? So check out the link in the bio and start your journey today. So the key thing here is that we're environmentally oriented. So the thing that you have to do at 4 p.m. fills up your brain and there isn't space for anything else, right? So you're thinking about that thing, you're thinking about the thing. We can't stop thinking about it and do something else. So this is what I found time and time and time again. If there's something that and this is why we respond so much to the environment, right? So if there's a deadline, if there's a test that I have to study for tomorrow, I will study today. Whatever is coming down the line will fill up my head. Now, why is it that we can't do this, right? Why can't we empty our head and just focus on the job interview at 4 p.m.? This is because we tend to have a lot of difficulty restraining our impulses, restraining our thoughts. We cannot shift our attention away from this. And part of the reason that we have difficulty with that is because this is the way that we have learned to survive. So if something is important, we don't want to forget. If something is important, it demands all of my attention. And so what we sort of learn with ADHD, and y'all may have experienced this, right, is once something is in your head, it's there for a long time. When I get really excited, or it's there until it isn't. So the ability to put things into your head or take things out of your head, that is the fundamental deficit in ADHD. We cannot switch. It's a problem. Remember, it's an attention deficit disorder, which means there are problems with attention. That goes both ways. It's not just that you can't focus, it's also that you can get into hyperfocus. So our brain says, this is important. Let's not forget, important things deserve to be thought about. Therefore, we're going to think about them. And so what this looks like, is a huge amount of unproductivity, right? So people will say, what is a symptom of ADHD? Everyone's like, we procrastinate. Although, why do we procrastinate? We look at this and we say, we're procrastinating, we're wasting time. It's that your mind is occupied. Your mind has to be occupied. It can't afford to do other things. prior to 4 p.m. until we learn how to train ourselves in that direction, okay, which we'll get to in a second. Second thing that we're going to talk about is guilt. So this person says, always feeling like I'm guilty or as if I'm in trouble, always feeling that whatever chore activity I'm doing it wrong and I should be doing something else. How does this happen? Always doing things wrong. Now, when you look at something like this, you may say, this looks like depression. And that's why the differential diagnosis is really important. You know, this is why jumping to this as a symptom of ADHD is, you have to be careful, because there could be other things that can make you feel always guilty. You can have a history of trauma. You can have a mood disorder. You know, you can have abusive parents growing up. You can have something like dependent personality disorder. This subjective feeling doesn't necessarily, it's not a smoking gun for ADHD. Now let's talk about the mechanism of why this happens in ADHD. So why does a human being think that they're always doing something wrong? Because they were taught they are always doing something wrong. It's not rocket science. So when you grow up with ADHD, you make all kinds of mistakes, okay? So when I make a mistake and I like forget to do my homework, right? Or I did my homework, but I leave it at home and then I get feedback. They're like, hey, you were supposed to do your homework. You didn't do your homework. Bad you. But if we think about it for a second, everybody makes mistakes. Neurotypical kids forget their homework too. They don't have this. Why? Here's the key thing. When a neurotypical child usually makes a mistake, they usually have the executive function, the emotional regulation, the ability to regulate their attention to correct the mistake, right? So I forgot it once, I won't forget it again. This type of feedback is useful in a neurotypical world. But with an ADHD kid, the world that we live in does not support us in the right way to not make that mistake again. So then what ends up happening is if I make a mistake and someone tells me to do it differently, and I say to myself, I need to do this differently. But if I make the mistake again, then what happens? Then I'm still worried about it. I make the mistake again, and I make the mistake again. So eventually what will happen is with a neurotypical kid, when you make a mistake, you correct your mistake, and then you can relax. You're not always doing something wrong. You made a mistake, you fixed it, now you can relax. But with ADHD, you can't correct your mistakes, which means the only way for you to not make mistakes is to be paranoid, be in a constant state of hypervigilance, because you cannot count on yourself to correct your problems. Therefore, unless you are thinking in this moment, I am making a mistake, I am doing it wrong, there must be a better way to do it, because you've said that to yourself all the time, and then you forgot about it, and then you ended up making the mistake again. So this paranoia of constant mistakes, this sense of overwhelming guilt that you feel all the time, is your adaptive mechanism. Because if I'm always worried that I could be doing something wrong, what is the likelihood that I will do something wrong? If I stop worrying that I'm making a mistake, what's going to happen? I'm going to make a mistake. People tell me to pay attention. People tell me not to forget. People tell me to focus. And the way that I'm going to do that is by being paranoid. There are a couple of other mechanisms here. So in our ADHD guide and guide to doing stuff, we talk a lot about the comorbidity between ADHD and depression. There's another YouTube video about it. So kids with ADHD, there's a causal link with a mood disorder and low self-esteem, because you can tell that your IQ is about the same as everybody else's. Kids are actually quite good at judging IQ, but you know that you can't perform the way that they can. You know you're just as smart as your classmates, but for some reason you get D's and they get A's. And so what you come away with is this idea there must be something broken within me because it's easy for everybody else. And people will say, just focus, just try harder, try harder, try harder. And you're like, I am trying harder. And then it doesn't work. So then you think, okay, like that must mean that there's something within me that's fundamentally broken, right? I'm going through life with a flat tire, but I'm jamming my foot on the gas pedal just like everybody else. There's something within me that is fundamentally broken. That will propagate the guilt. The third thing is there is an emotional regulation deficit. So people with ADHD will experience emotions more intensely, more quickly, and for a longer period. So this may be like a 4 out of 10 guilt for a neurotypical person. That'll turn into an 8 out of 10 guilt. It'll persist for way longer. So they sort of live with this constant feeling of I could be doing better. Maybe I'm doing things wrong. Maybe I feel guilty. Okay? Really common. And if you look at it, right, so what I like about this is like unrecognized symptom of ADHD is literally, if we pull out the DSM, excessive guilt or paranoia that you're always doing something wrong is not going to be a diagnostic feature. That won't be part of the DSM criteria. Does that make sense? So I think this kind of stuff can be good on the internet. I think people get a lot of things wrong, but this is pretty good. If you are an ADHD person, if you're a neuroatypical person who tries to force yourself to live a neurotypical life, it's going to be really exhausting. So the amount of energy that you put in is not going to be commensurate with the yield that you get. Now, the reason that we do this is because this is what we're told to do. We need to focus more. We need to try harder. Stick with one thing. So usually what I try to do is, instead of forcing my ADHD patients to do things the way that everybody else does them, I think you should start with the question of what brings you to your best, right? How do you do this in the best way possible? Like you doing it. So something as simple as, if you can't focus on anything during the day, if you have an interview at 4 p.m., do your best not to schedule interviews at 4 p.m. And what I tend to find is most of my patients lack the executive function training to think that far ahead. They don't consider that, right? So you have to sit down and start to make rules for yourself. What are the rules for you? Because your brain ain't automatically going to do it. So a big part of this is also formalizing the process of making change. So what are the rules that bring out the best in you? And look at them on a piece of paper. Start following those rules when you structure your life. And if someone says, hey, we're sorry, the only time we can do is at 4 p.m. This is also really common where my patients with ADHD, job interview calls me back and they say, hey, we'd love to bring you in for an interview. Does 4 p.m. next Tuesday work? And what does someone with ADHD say? They say yes, without even thinking about it, because we don't want to piss people off. We're lucky to get this job. We want this at all. We want this so much. We don't want to risk them not liking us. So instead of just creating that situation for yourself, take a step back and say, do y'all have anything available in the morning? When's the first morning slot you have available? You just say that. So if you're someone who can't focus, if you've got something at 4 p.m. and someone, at some point that time is offered to you, usually, right? If you have no choice, it's a different story. Like if you have an exam or something that's scheduled for everybody. But I would say 80% of the time, people will ask you if 4 p.m. works. Say, don't even make an excuse. This is where we get into excuses. Don't make an excuse. Don't provide a reason. Does 4 p.m. work with you? Do you have any availability in the morning? That is all you say. Really hard with ADHD because you want to say so much. There's so much in your head. No. Do you have anything available in the morning? Not on that day. When's your first morning availability? We don't have anything that week. Okay, fine. Then 4 p.m. will work. And you can say, look, if you guys don't have any morning availability, I really want to come to this interview. I'd love to do 4 p.m. If y'all have anything available that week in the a.m., I would strongly prefer that, right? You don't need to know reasons or anything like that. You don't have to explain or justify or whatever. Don't do things at 4 p.m. Second thing is that a lot of the problems you have to solve are solved outside of the problem. This is such a huge mistake that people with ADHD make, my patients make. They come in, they say, oh, I'm having problems with my relationship. That is not a problem that you solve in your relationship. I know that sounds insane. This is where, once we understand the mechanism of ADHD, there are root issues in the brain that if we correct those root issues, the downstream problems will get corrected. So this is why everyone's like, if someone tells me to meditate one more time, I'm done. Why do we tell people to meditate? Because meditate will strengthen your brain in the way that will help you with these problems, which then gets to the whole, it's hard for people with ADHD to meditate. That's why we go into that in the guide, and we have a bunch of stuff on our channel, so you guys can take a look at that stuff if you want to, how to meditate with ADHD. We have this program specifically for training your impulse control and attention. Okay, so a lot of times this emotional regulation stuff, this attentional control stuff, and this is the big mistake that people with ADHD make. We want to solve our problem and skill up at the same time. We want to skill up to solve our problem. We want to work on our problem and skill up. You can't work on your problem. You can. That's a terrible way to do it. You should skill up outside of the problem, right? So if I'm like preparing to play professional tennis, the practice happens outside of the match. In ADHD, you want to level up while you are solving the problem. The leveling up is outside of the problem. When I go into an instance and I try to take down a raid boss, if I wipe, the way to not wipe is to gear up outside of the raid boss. But we get so hyper focused on this particular thing. We want to solve this thing. We want to solve this thing. We want to solve this thing. We don't level up outside of it. So if you look at things like what does therapy for ADHD actually entail? It involves leveling up. It's kind of like training for a marathon, and then there's the marathon. Everyone with ADHD, what they do is they just show up at the marathon, they try to run it, they fail, and they're like, I need to try way harder. I need to try way harder. So they show up at the marathon again, and then they fail again. And they say, I need to try way harder. They show up to the marathon a third time, and they fail again. Now you've created another problem, which is that you failed at a marathon 3 times, and what do you think about yourself? You start to think, I'm never going to be able to run a marathon. You start to think to yourself, I'm not a marathon person. You start to feel hopeless. Therein comes the depression. Okay? So skills training is outside. And now, why is this so common sense? Why doesn't everyone do it? And that's where we go back to this. I overdo what I want and I underdo what I need to do. This is what's so devastating about it. Meditating is leveling up your brain so that you will be able to do these kinds of things in the future. But what do you think is the actual attraction to meditating in the here and now when you have a circuitry that is externally oriented? When you have a circuitry that is environmentally oriented, when you have a task that yields you no immediate benefit, like studying for an exam that you have at the end of the month, your brain does not want to do it. This is why it is such a crippling issue. Because the whole point is that you can't do it ahead of time. You need that external level of environment to motivate you in order to act. So training outside of doing the task, going and grinding gears so that you can down the raid boss is incredibly boring. It's not how your motivation system works. So how do you address that? And that's where I suggest you start very concretely in doing things that are not important to do. This is transformative. So as you look around, you'll see there's all kinds of stuff that you should do, all kinds of things that you need to do, and all kinds of things that you want to do. What I encourage you to do is just practice doing the task that you don't want to do. And it's not even about should or need. It is recognizing that once your brain has a certain motivational system that is active, once I train my brain only to act in last-minute panic, then what I require is last-minute panic in order to act, right? Neurons that fire together wire together. So we want to start unwiring those neurons. We want to take a small little thing. I have this thing that has been sitting on my desk for 6 months. And this is something that my daughter 3D printed for me in 3D printing class. It's been sitting here. I didn't want to throw it away. I think it's a cat, maybe. Can't tell. Yeah, maybe it's a cat, some kind of animal. And it's just been sitting here. I also have a sanitizing wipe from United on my desk. And I have a pencil. These 3 objects have been sitting on my desk for like a year. And I never dealt with them. So what am I going to do today when I'm done with stream? I'm going to take care of these 3 objects. Now, it's important to understand why I'm doing this. I'm not doing it because I should do it. I'm not doing it because it needs to be clean. I'm doing this because I want to train myself to decouple action from environmental stimulus. I want to start acting when I don't need to. And this is where, like Dr. Michaela said, a big mistake that we make is that we try to start with things that are emotionally active for us. We start with things that are important. Huge mistake. Don't start with the things that are important. Start with the things that are unimportant. Because if something is important, it's going to trigger your emotional circuitry. The moment that you trigger your emotional circuitry, remember we have an emotional dysregulation problem with ADHD. So those emotions are going to hit you harder, they're going to hit you faster, and they're going to hit you for longer. You're actually making things hard for yourself. If I'm a level 1 character and I start aggroing level 90 mobs and I keep wiping over and over and over again, I'm not actually leveling up. So start with tasks that are unimportant and focus on doing it just to train yourself to get into the habit of doing things without it being important. Great place to start. Hey y'all, hope you enjoyed today's video. We talk about a bunch of topics like this on the channel, so be sure to subscribe for more. If you're already subscribed, GG, and we'll see you in chat.